Addressing Gettysburg.
Did you know that there are almost 300 audio shows and almost 100 video shows on our Patreon page? Did you know that several respectable licensed battlefield guides are patrons? Patreon now allows a 7-day free trial if you're not sure you want to join, and it allows you to purchase individual episodes if you don't want to become a member, although it is cheaper to become a member. There are also monthly and annual subscriptions available. Folks, I don't know if this is going out live or not right now like it's supposed to, but I'll tell you something. This is our 4th attempt at starting the show, and 2025 could very well be the last year of Addressing Gettysburg, if I can't get to the point where I can hire a producer. I mean, someone who knows what they're doing, and I don't have to worry about it. And a doctor. So go to patreon.com/addressinggettysburg and join us today.
77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation, so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that the nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far beyond our poor powers to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
From the Gettysburg Museum of History Studios, you're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Heaven help us. Heaven help us. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this special edition of Addressing Gettysburg. It is November 18th when we are recording this. November 19th, of course, the anniversary of the Gettysburg Address. And with me today is an old guest, an old friend, an old man who has been a licensed battlefield guide for, over 30 years now, Bob, right?
Testing whether that friendship or any friendship so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. But Matthew, as you well know, we've had bigger tests than this, yes, and we still love each other.
Of course we do, Bobby. Now, how many years have you been a guide?
You know what? 35 years ago,
35
on November
years.
3rd, I passed the written exam.
Great.
And so it was, I had to wait a little more than a year to take the oral and become a guide. So this is the end of my 34th year. 34th year. So you're almost on 35. Mm-hmm. And the Gettysburg Address, I know now, is a big part of your tour. You recite it, you know it by heart, verbatim, if you will, if you prefer Latin. And you
You are, I've seen a lot of tours that you do. And I don't know if you still do it this way, but I remember, you would end the tour, these were bike tours, and you would end them at Pickett's Charge usually. And you would do part of the Gettysburg Address at some point. But the one thing I always loved was that if you did 10 tours in a week, and 8 of them, you made the mothers cry. You always made the women cry, and I loved that because they're standing there at Pickett's Charge, and you're talking about young Alonzo Cushing, and then usually it's like at sunset, and back in the days when I was going out on the tours with you, it was like sunset. It was beautiful. You're telling this horrible story of Alonzo Cushing, and then you throw in the Gettysburg Address, and you look over, and Mom's looking at her little 10-year-old son, and picturing him in 10 years in Alonzo's place, and she's crying. And it was beautiful, and I loved it. I always say, if your work makes somebody cry, you've done a great job. Unless, of course, your work is torture.
The world will little nor long remember what I say here.
Correct.
But it can never forget what Alonzo Cushing and Jeremiah Gage and others did.
That's right. Exactly. And Lincoln was the first one to bring that to our attention. And we're talking about the Gettysburg Address today. Mm-hmm. You and I have discussed the Gettysburg Address many times in our 20-year storied past, and we love it, right?
Absolutely.
I listen to, it's hard for me to listen to any politician speak and really get worked up, because the Gettysburg Address, it not only raised the bar, but it sent the bar hundreds of miles too high in the sky that very few come close to, in my estimation. Now, I don't know every political speech ever given, but I'm sure I would know another one if it was as good as the Gettysburg Address. Mm. The beauty of the Gettysburg Address to me is its pithiness, but also the way he says it. It's, you know what I mean? Like the words that he chooses. It's a beautiful speech.
It really is.
And when you take into account the context of when and where he's giving it, it's even more powerful. But you have a whole bunch of stuff that you want to get to about this. Now, you had said something about Alexander Stephens when we were talking about this early on. And in fact, I think it was the way Dave put it in the calendar was Alexander Stephens' influence on Abraham Lincoln or something. I was like, that's interesting. And then we got to talking about it. But it's not really that as we got to talk about it, right?
Right.
Explain what we're going to do today.
So what we're going to do is, I've got a 4-part plan here. Talk about the context of the speech. And that's where Alexander Stephens has a role to play, I think, though I can't connect the dots.
Okay.
I don't have anything written from Abraham Lincoln saying that he had Alexander Stephens in mind, but we'll talk about that later. So I thought maybe we could talk about the context of the speech and then take a deep dive into the speech, word by word. And
I like that.
Learn some of the magnificence of it. Even just last night, it occurred to me, we talked about this, that it reminded me of something, and we'll talk about that. So the context, a deep dive into the words of the speech, and then the impact of the speech afterwards. And I'm imagining that was recorded. Mm-hmm. George Pataki, the governor of New York, what does he open? The very first words of the first anniversary of 9/11 at the pit at Ground Zero were Lincoln's words, the very first words.
To me, they're a comforting speech. Mm-hmm. They're comforting words because he's showing like that he's a true leader. I almost feel like he's saying, like some of the stuff, and we'll get into it, obviously, but some of it in there, he's asking people who are standing amidst the fresh graves of men who died right around where they're standing. And he's asking people to keep it going, mm-hmm. because there's something loftier, mm-hmm. that we have to fight for, right. This new birth of freedom. And that new birth of freedom isn't for you. It's for others. And that's got to be hard to say, yes, take my son for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But he's steadfast. His words are not uncertain, right?
Not at all.
He means every word he says and says every word he means. And it does everything. It tugs at your patriotic heartstrings. It tugs at your religiosity, if you've got any. It's just everything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think it's just a perfect political speech. But I interrupted you.
As it did on September 11th, 2002.
Yeah.
Surrounded by the pit where the Twin Towers had been. I grew up across the river in New Jersey from those, and I watched them being built.
Yeah.
And
I grew up across the river and watched them go down.
Okay. You weren't there that day to see them go down, though, right?
Well, I was in New Jersey.
In New Jersey.
Yeah. I watched them go down on TV, but I went to a hill in my town because I knew you could see them. And after they had fallen, I went up there just to see the plume of smoke.
Right. And you probably did see that plume of smoke.
Oh, it's the only thing you could see. I mean, you have to understand, it was a crystal clear sky that day.
Yeah.
And the only thing you could see was that cloud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was devastating.
It was horrible.
I know when I first came back, it was 4 days later. And so used to that skyline that I grew up with.
Yep.
We were going to a wedding of my nephew, and his uncle, my sister's brother-in-law, should have been in those towers, but he wanted to get out of a business trip. He worked for an insurance company that was in a tower, and he didn't want to take that trip, but they wouldn't let him, so he was gone when they hit, and his workers were gone.
Oh, my God.
So imagine the pain that those people there, surrounded by the death and reminders, like you just said, and take that to 1863, November 19th, and we're at a cemetery. That's part of the context we'll get into. And then at the very end, I'd like to get into the relevance of the speech today, because that is the beauty of this speech. It has impacted every generation. 80 years ago, my father, as we speak, was in the South Pacific fighting to make sure that government of the people, by the people, and for the people should not perish from the earth. About 80 years before that, my great-grandfather was a Union soldier fighting for that cause. And I had relatives in the Revolution 80 years
go way back.
That, yeah. On my mom's side of the family, 1640 is when they came over. So yeah, and it is it's powerful. I think it's the greatest speech in the history of the English language, frankly. And I've heard Churchill. I'm not that old, Matt.
Right,
Churchill.
You went mad.
By the way, which one of us has the most hair, Matt? Okay. So anyway, I think it's.
Are we counting the body or just the?
Well, if you count that, you got it. So I was at a conference at a convention for Braver Angels this summer. They asked me to come to talk about some of the things we're going to be talking about. And there was another presentation from the Lincoln Institute from Springfield. And there were all sorts of Lincoln scholars there. And we were having a discussion about what was the greatest of Lincoln's speeches. And the only other one that I would entertain before that was the second inaugural. And maybe the first inaugural would come third after the Gettysburg Address. But there were people there who reported that, I think it was John Meacham that they had been with, said it was the Cooper Union speech. Apparently, when he was done with that speech, this hayseed from Illinois with a Kentucky accent, his first real exposure coming out to Eastern elites, there was a moment of silence. Like, we just witnessed something incredible.
Yeah.
And then they broke into applause that was overwhelming because of his logic. He was, we won't get into the Cooper Union speech. This will go for too long.
Yeah. But okay, so let's the context of Gettysburg. Let's start with that, or of the Gettysburg Address. Let's start with the context of that and work our way through here.
Okay. One more thing. Sorry about this.
Jesus.
I was giving a tour probably for when you owned Gettysburg. This was probably a score years ago, 20 or more years ago. Well, maybe 15. I was giving a tour, and we were at the peach orchard. It's a group of people. And I remember one of the more astute guys who was paying careful attention and asking good questions and responding, not with tears at Jeremiah Gage's letter, but at the peach orchard, I remember he said, this is all really interesting. But what does it mean? And that, I think, is the beginning of my getting really interested in the Gettysburg Address, because it gives meaning to the second most important thing that ever happened at Gettysburg.
The first being
the speech.
Gettysburg. Oh, yes.
Well, the first is the foundation, the establishing of Gettysburg.
Second
addressing Gettysburg.
Third is the battle.
Being the speech, in my opinion.
The speech, okay.
And then the battle.
Okay.
I believe that.
But there'd be no speech without a battle.
This is true. This is true.
Yeah, obviously it's more important.
So that's the plan. The context, the speech, a deep dive, and then the impact of the speech and the relevance today.
Okay.
Briefly.
Go ahead.
Okay. So a little bit of social context. There is an art of dying. I think I'm pronouncing this correctly in Latin, ars moriendi, which was part of the culture of the day. It's a good death is one where you're surrounded by your family and you are going to speak some last words, which will be meaningful,
very
and transcendent and profound, right? Because you're at the verge of death.
Yeah.
And the people, your family has your body and they know you died and they were all there. And that's a good death. But now think about the American Civil War. It was anything but that.
Horrendous death.
Yes. Bodies being sometimes blown apart, eaten by hawks sometimes. You're dying maybe 1,000 miles or certainly hundreds of miles away from home. And your family isn't going to get a part of your body. Unless, like Jeremiah Gage, you touched the letter to your ooze, the blood that's oozing out of the hip. And he is expressing his last words, and he is trying to give his family some comfort. And when he's talking about why he did this and why he died. But that's part of the context of the speech. This is a ceremony to dedicate a cemetery. In the bloodiest battle, or for the bloodiest battle, in the bloodiest war, still the bloodiest war the United States has ever been in. And this is a new thing. It's part of the transcendentalism is big. The Romantic period, the rural cemetery movement is big. These are cemeteries which are going to be beautiful. There's going to be trees and flowers, and Mount Auburn, the first of these in Cambridge, Massachusetts, would have a pond and monuments. And can you sort of see our cemetery today at Gettysburg minus the pond?
Sort of.
Yeah. It's a place to sit. There's benches there and meditate and contemplate life and death and the meaning of it. That's part of the context too. The personal context of Lincoln. He says, government of the people. Well, he was of the people. He was born into poverty in Kentucky. He was self-educated and he loved to read. He was acquainted with grief. At age 3 or 4, his infant brother Thomas died. At age 9, his mother Nancy died. At age 19, his sister Sarah died. At age 26, his romantic interest, Anne Rutledge, died. His sons, Edward in 1850 when he was 4 years old, and Willie in 1862 when he was 11 years old, all died. He suffered from severe depression. It's a great book called Lincoln's Melancholia. And he overcame that. He always suffered from it.
Right.
He always did. But he learned from it.
Yeah.
And he became a better man for it.
I totally believe that. You could either succumb to it and amount to nothing, or you can come to grips with the fact that you have it, learn to manage it, and see what it can teach you about yourself.
Absolutely.
And it is possible, because I've done it, and it didn't really take me very long once I came to that conclusion, but it took me 40 years to come to that conclusion.
Yeah.
Or 39. But, you know, you got to get there somehow, someday. And I did. But like, I believe that,
right.
Yeah.
He was of the people. He was like us. He knew how hard life was. He was a realistic optimist in a sense. He knew the crap of life. Am I allowed to swear on
Sure.
this? No.
Sure.
He had a troubled marriage with Mary.
It sounds like a nightmare.
His father hired him out when he was young, and so he knew hard work, and he knew the value of labor. And though he would never say he identified with being a slave, I think it helped him to create a heart that would want to make sure that people were receiving the fruit of their labor. And he saw slavery firsthand at 19 on a flatboat trip he took from Indiana to New Orleans. So he was, as he'll say in a speech, of the people. And he knew what government by the people was like. He was a postmaster in New Salem, Illinois, a county surveyor, a lawyer, captain of militia during the Black Hawk War, served in the Illinois legislature, elected and served in the U.S. House of Representatives as a Whig in 1847. He ran for the Illinois Senate, and he was elected president of the United States. So he was of the people, and he was for the people. He pushed for improvements to help the common man succeed. He was known as a good listener. He opened the White House regularly to meet with common people. He sought out different opinions. His cabinet was termed the team of rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin's book. He made his generals unhappy by pardoning many deserters. So he had this compassionate side to him. He often visited wounded soldiers in the hospital. And part of the context will be what he did right after he delivers this speech. Where's the first place he goes? Right after this speech. He, in his second inaugural, you can see his heart when he talks about with malice toward none, with charity toward all. Militarily, I don't know how much to get into this. I won't very much. But the battle was 27 months into the war, and this speech is a little more than 4 months after the battle. Militarily, the Battle of Gettysburg is considered a turning point psychologically. But though it was incredibly bloody, Lee's army got away.
Yeah.
And how much was really settled? Because the war goes on another 21 months after this, and there'll be just as much bloodshed in those 21 months as there was in the 27 before Gettysburg. The context, though, militarily, the Southerners had been winning victory after victory, and then there's Gettysburg, the first major victory, indisputable in the East. And everyone's expecting the war to be over. Because what happens the next day, Matt?
It ends.
Vicksburg.
Oh, Vicksburg.
And the Mississippi River has fallen, and the South is split into two. So the mood of the country politically is exalting. And then what happens? July 13th, while Lee's army is still north of the Potomac River, the riots begin in New York City.
Draft riots, yeah.
Anti-draft riots. Poor people resent being drafted to fight a rich man's war for a black man. And they're targeting black people. The Negro Orphans Asylum was purposely burned down. At least 11 blacks were lynched. Estimated deaths, at least 120, and it could be 10 times that. No one knows for sure. Estimated at least 2,000 hurt, though, in the largest riots in American political history. Those are going on when bad news is arriving. Lee crosses the Potomac on the 14th of July. So the country who thought the war was going to be over, Lincoln was serenaded on July 7th, and he made a little talk, a little soliloquy. He said, I don't have a speech yet. He will have a speech. It'll be 4 months later.
Yeah.
But that's part of the context, too. The country was expecting the war to be over, and then it wasn't, with Lee's successful retreating over the Potomac River. How much longer is it going to go on? And then the plans for this cemetery. It's going to be a reminder of the cost of this war and of this battle in particular. 23,000 casualties and well over 3,000 dead that are now going to be interred in Gettysburg soil. While the plans are going on for the cemetery, more devastating military news. The Battle of Chickamauga, September 1920, the second bloodiest battle of the war in Georgia, another Confederate victory. So the roller coaster of emotions, we're now at a trough when this dedication is taking place. Lincoln's reelection will be a little less than a year away, but most people aren't giving him much chance. Even in the summer of 1864, he didn't think he had much chance to win this election, according to himself from a couple of sources. So that's the military context and the social political context, because in a modern democracy, you need the people behind you.
Right.
I mean, how did Vietnam go for us?
Not very well.
And Afghanistan for us or the Russians or anyone else who's ever tried to fight there, right?
Stay away.
Yeah. So you need the people behind you.
Right.
That's the kind of military context. The immediate context. He gets an invitation. It's the desire that after the oration, you, as chief executive of the nation, formally set apart these grounds to their sacred use by a few appropriate remarks. So he's not going to be making the main speech. We know that that's going to be Edward Everett. By the way, he got that invitation, or it was written on November 2nd. On November 9th, he went to a play. Guess what theater he went to?
Ford's.
Yeah, and guess what actor was playing in The Marble Heart?
John Wilkes Booth.
And Lincoln was in the audience.
I bet he applauded for him, too.
I'll bet he did. Mm-hmm. And then Lincoln's last public remarks on April 11th, 1865, when he talks about perhaps some blacks should be given the vote.
Oh, and that's when Booth's like...
And Booth's in the audience.
Yeah.
So Lincoln was in the audience for Booth, and Booth was in the audience for Lincoln.
Right.
And Lincoln said something, or not Lincoln, Booth said something like, that's the last speech he'll ever give. And 4 days later, he murdered Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah. Man of his word, John Wilkes Booth.
Well, I guess you can say that. Immediate context. He wants to be here. It was originally planned that this speech would be given that he would come rather on just the 19th. He would take a train in the morning, come, and then go back.
Right.
And he squashed that. He said, no, I want to be there. And that's going to give him opportunity to go to the battlefield. Now, Matt,
yes,
and your listeners,
yes,
you've been on the battlefield. Have you been affected by the place?
I would say so.
You can feel the spirits of the great deeds that were done. And
sure, feel something.
And I'm sure he did too, just because of some of the words he chooses to use.
Well, there was a lot more evidence of it then too.
Right. Mary pleaded him not to go because Tad was ill. And actually Lincoln was ill too. He just didn't know it yet. And he'll start to feel it later, like as he's going back. But Mary does not want him to go. Remember, he still has mourning bands that he's wearing when he's giving the Gettysburg Address for Willie's death earlier last year. And he did tour the battlefield the morning of the speech. The oration was delivered by Edward Everett, 2 hours and all that good stuff. That's not my point to get there. Last little bit of context. I think this is the last little bit of context. What were Lincoln's goals? You tell me.
With the speech?
Yeah.
Well, to remind us of where we've been, to acknowledge where we are, and to, I guess, get people behind him to follow him to where we're going. And actually, it's not even following him. They're starting that generation. They're starting the path, but it's really he's passing on a message to the rest of us who keep listening to it, who keep reading it, that this is something that we all have to continue.
Yeah.
And it's exhausting. It's a never-ending struggle. Why did he giveth us this task still remains before us?
I love two things about that because we'll be talking about it. One, you've zeroed in on one of the important themes that work through it, that of time, the past, the present, the future. But also you began to speak in King James English. Giveth, yeah. Because that's what permeated his reading. We'll talk a little bit about his reading, but that's what permeates America at the time, the King James version of the Bible. Yeah. And most Americans, even if they weren't professing Christians, and Lincoln, I'm not sure he was. Actually, he never joined a church, and I think there's better evidence that he wasn't than that he was. But things are happening inside Lincoln's heart. He does change as he gets older and as he experiences life.
I imagine that, being in his position as the president of the United States, as the country is torn apart in civil war, and not only are the boys who are fighting under your flag dying, but the boys who you're trying to bring back under your flag are also dying. That's got to weigh on anybody. And, I think, I have a hard time believing that Lincoln hated the South, that Lincoln hated Southerners. I think everybody else in the country hated the South and hated Southerners. But either he was a really good liar, which it could have been. He's a politician after all, right? He's either a really good liar in his speeches where he's always talking about peace. You mentioned his two inaugurals. It's like, we're brothers. We need to get along. We need to take care of ourselves and each other and everything. He's never a firebrand against the South.
No, he doesn't mention the South as anything but suggesting that they're part of this experiment in this speech. Okay, in the first inaugural, when we will be touched by the better angels of our nature,
right? Which is a phrase I'm sure people have used it before him, but everybody uses it in one way or another now. Right. I mean, you're part of this organization. The Braver Angels originally was called Better Angels, wasn't it?
Right.
Yeah, and you changed it to Braver Angels. And
because the name was already taken.
Oh, okay.
And they didn't want to be sued.
Well, and then you also have Visiting Angels.
Yeah, that's right.
Which, God forbid any of us needs, but they're there. But no, so
well, hold it, Matt. You said I was old.
I know.
So I might need it pretty soon.
That's why I said, God forbid.
Would you be my visiting angel?
Oh, Matt? No. But Cindy might.
Okay.
Cindy might too.
Thank you, Cindy.
No, but so let's get into the speech though itself, because we were talking on the phone before and you had a really good one. You mentioned King James and everything. And since we were unable to get the live stream going and we're recording this, we can't get the callers involved. So we have a peanut gallery in the back. We have our engineer, Colby. We've got our friend, Eric Houston, and my beloved darling, Cindy. And let's all, if we can, join this discussion at points, okay?
Okay.
All right, so Bob, one of the things that we talked about, King James, you had asked me what's the one word that describes, that I would think of. What the hell was the question? I forget now.
Okay, so let me back up here. So it was... well, one thing we were going to try to create would be a Gettysburg top 5 events list, putting, of course, your founding of Gettysburg and addressing Gettysburg.
Those are the givens, yeah. But no, this was the last question.
Okay, so call or send us your one simple sentence summary of the Gettysburg Address.
All right, but so on the phone earlier, you just said to me one word.
Okay, and let me continue. And what would you say was the most important single word of the speech? So if you could summarize it in one word.
That wasn't the question you asked me, but that's good. So,
and you can use the word you did because you are such.
Well, so I said the word I said was religious, but not in a Christian sense or Jewish sense or any other sense that we think of as a religion, but in the American religion. And I know that sounds stupid because the United States government can't form a religion, but I look at whatever you want to call it, our patriotism or whatever, as somewhat of a religion, because there's certain things that you must believe. And when you question them, Or you say, well, that's not really what happened on Paul Revere's ride. Or, well, George Washington really didn't say that about the cherry tree. And, that's people they lose their minds, right? Like a religious person would when you challenge their religious beliefs. So I say the American religion. And I look at the Gettysburg Address as almost like the Apostles' Creed or, something. This is what we believe. This is what we've been through as a people before now. This is what we're going through now. And this is what we must be in the future. And but you mentioned something interesting about the rhythm of. Do you remember what you were talking about?
Yeah.
All right. So let me ask the people in the back here, the peanut gallery. You're all very religious people back there. I'm going to 87 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent. Does it remind you of any prayer? At least the rhythm.
Our Father who art in heaven.
There we go.
Colby Sumner, right
Colby,
there.
you did that so fast. I have been thinking about this speech for years and years. And just last night when I couldn't sleep and I started to pray, I thought, hold it. I think I've heard that rhythm before.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I mean, I was raised in a super religious family. Go like church multiple times a week. It's in the house. But I will say, like, and I usually
put the camera on you, damn it.
Oh, I forget every time. My bad. I will say that typically, Matt gives me a hard time on the live shows. Typically, if I get into too religious territory, but I will. I
fall asleep.
I truly believe that those like religious people believe that the Bible is the infallible word of God, given to humans. Through given to us through humans to be able to receive. I believe those words are in some way given to Lincoln by God because something special. I think that's why there's so many similarities that even in the cadence, when you can hear it, it sounds like the Lord's Prayer.
I think that's a good point there, because if you believe in God and you believe that people are put in positions they're put in at the time they're put there for a reason, and that there's a mighty hand at work, I don't know how anybody.
Which by the end, Lincoln clearly believes this.
Well,
I mean, you listen to this second inaugural. He wasn't always there, but by the end, he believes in a God providence, who is directing things.
Right.
With the humility.
Right. And
not that God's humble, but Lincoln's
humble by it. I don't know how you could, if you're a believer, I don't know how you could look at Lincoln and not think that about him. Mm-hmm. That, like this country had to go through that struggle. And there was only one guy. And you know what's so interesting now, and this is like going way off the rails from what we're talking about here, but Lincoln's born in a dirt floor cabin, right? And he rises to president of the United States and he's assassinated. Jesus is born in a manger and he rises to be the Son of God and he's assassinated, basically. Very similar. What?
Not only that, too, but their impact that they leave on the world after they're gone
goes on forever.
Unmeasurable.
I mean, as we're recording this, there's the Lincoln Forum out at the Wyndham going on with Harold Holzer and all these Lincoln historians. It's an annual thing that they have. When one of our friends, Wendy Allen, is there, all she does is paintings of Lincoln. Her not entire career, but she has made her money doing Lincoln portraits in various ways, and they're beautiful. Yeah. They're great. But like, we love this guy.
Right. In that July 7th soliloquy where Lincoln is responding to a serenade, they're asking for a speech. The few sentences he does say, he's talking about Adams and Jefferson, who died on the same day as the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And the Declaration of Independence is at the heart and soul of Abraham Lincoln, and it's at the heart and soul of the United States of America, according to, and I think he's right, Abraham Lincoln. And what is at the heart and soul of that are the words, all men are created equal. And I I am a religious person. I think you know that about me.
Sure.
Okay.
Never shut up about it.
See, there it is.
Well, that's because
I'm just kidding.
That's because I love Jesus.
No, but I like talking about it with you because you really understand it and you believe it. Colby doesn't know what the hell he's talking about.
I have to say,
I'm
looking
teasing you.
Looking at Lincoln though, even when I have studied him individually, I am constantly reminded of the story of Job.
Mm-hmm.
He's
Job
put
Bluth?
through, what's that?
Job Bluth?
No, but most people know the story of Job. He's put through every trial imaginable, and God has the ultimate faith that he won't be tempted by the devil and so on and so forth. But I think Lincoln sees that. I think the longer he goes through life, I think Lincoln is honestly feels as though he is Job, and I think that's how he comes through this with such humility is because most people when they're put into even a fraction of the situation Lincoln finds himself in. You just, earlier, Bob, you just went through the whole spiel. He's lost so many children. He's lost just about every family member you can imagine along the way. He's had a terrible time since he's become the president of the United States. I mean, his army is just constantly losing. He can't find hardly anybody on his side. He's got a cabinet that is most of the time working against him. And this is where things start to change, but I think it's through that humility and having his eye on the prize. He never takes his eye off of the end goal, and I think all of that combined, I think that's how you end up with the manifestation of these words. And I think if I were to give it one word myself to describe it, I think I would say soul. He's bearing a soul to us. I mean, I think that's what he felt in the deepest recesses of Lincoln. That's what he feels, and I think that's why it's still so impactful to this day.
Yeah.
Another reason it's impactful is it's so universal, and that's one of the themes that I want you to listen for when you hear the words. But why is it so universal? I've been told that every religion in the world basically believes the golden rule. Do unto others.
Right.
And Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount will say that this sums up the law and the prophets. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Right.
That's equality.
Yeah.
In a sense, right?
Sure.
Now, there is an American civic religion. And I am in no way am I a Christian nationalist, okay? I'm about as far from a Christian nationalist as you could possibly become.
Okay.
My first allegiance is to King Jesus. I love God first, and that's something else Jesus said when asked, what's the greatest commandment? The first is love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. The second, like unto it, is love your neighbor as yourself. But it's that concept of loving your neighbor as yourself that I see expressed in the Declaration of Independence, where it talks about all men are created equal and the consent of the governed.
Yes.
And that's why this government that we have, why I love it so much. I think I can love without it becoming a religion for me.
Sure.
This country, because I have the priorities of loving God first. But this is getting too religious.
Yes, it is. So, okay. So,
but this is the time. This is the culture that he was in. So when he said,
well, that's a good point. The time that this happened in, it was a very religious time.
Right. And they knew these terms. So when he says, he starts this with 77 years ago. Okay, obviously, what's he referring to?
The founding of the country.
1776, the Declaration of Independence. But also, the speech is so beautiful because in 271 words, he can do this because he's got this whole culture. He can say a word and all sorts of images come from it. For example, 77 years. What comes to mind to the listeners, Psalm 90:10, the days of our years are 70 years and 10.
Oh.
Okay.
Gotcha.
And it goes on.
Yeah.
But that's going to call in lifetime. And his speech is about, one of the themes is the life, not so much of an individual, but the life of a nation. I'm reading a book called Reading with Lincoln now.
Okay.
And I'm basically reading with Lincoln.
It sounds like a children's book.
The author is not a children's book.
Okay.
But what did Lincoln read, and how did that fuel his thinking and therefore his words? One of the things he read was Edward Gibbon's The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. Another was Volney's The Ruins. These are major works that were influencing society back then, that were talking about the rise and fall of nations, and especially of democracies. Now, to get back to what we were saying before, the Lord's Prayer begins with 7 syllables. Our Father who art in heaven. And the Gettysburg Address begins with 7 syllables, 77 years ago. Was that intended on his part? I doubt it. Maybe it was. But it could be intuitive genius on his part too. So in just a few words, he is calling into your mind life, and in this case, of a nation. I'm going to keep going, but chime in. He goes on to say, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Before I go any farther, peanut gallery, is that what you call those guys?
Gallery?
Colby?
Yeah.
Colby, of those words from
Colby's
the
Mr.
Declaration,
Peanut.
of the words that all men are created equal, if you are reciting the Gettysburg Address, which of those words do you emphasize?
Created.
Matt, what do you? All men are created equal.
Dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
All, okay.
Yeah, all.
Cindy, do you want to chime in? She's not going to emphasize men.
No, I wasn't, but I was actually going to say all as well.
Cindy says all. Eric, how about you?
Yeah, I would have said all.
Okay. I don't.
All. What do you say?
I don't anymore. I do the Gettysburg Address almost daily, a couple times a day, because I try to end every tour with what I consider the most important thing that happened at Gettysburg.
Let me see if I can guess which you. So we all put the emphasis on all. Conceiving liberty.
I said created.
You said created?
I'm a hybrid. It would either be created or equal. I really don't know. It's one of those two words.
So
for me.
Bob is going to say.
I think he's going to say equal.
2. And dedicated to the proposition that all men are created.
No, it's just the words from the Declaration that are quoted. That all men are created equal.
I think yours is equal.
So then you're going to say equal.
No.
Really?
No.
That.
Stay tuned. And I'm not sure that that's what Lincoln would have done.
Well, what is the word? What is the word that you emphasize?
Are.
That all men are created equal.
And stay tuned for the context and how Alexander Stevens fits into this.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. There we go.
All right.
Okay. Back to Alex.
So
go ahead.
Notice the theme of birth, life, death, and rebirth in the speech as we hear it.
Sure.
Okay. The death of individuals, soldiers.
Born unto a virgin, lived, suffered, died, buried, rose from the dead.
Okay. And by the way, what day did Abraham Lincoln get shot?
Good Friday.
Good Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wasn't so good for him.
No. Okay. So in that part that I just read, you're hearing.
I mean, how weird is that? I'm starting to think more and more about this.
Of the connection with Lincoln.
He's the American Jesus, not to blaspheme, but you know what I'm saying? Like, you get what I'm saying?
I do. Be careful you don't take that too far.
No, I'm not. I'm not trying to. But like the humble beginnings, and he rises to be this influential person who is so. I mean, look, they take his name off the ballot in some states. The country, half the country says sayonara when he's elected. Okay, they hate him. They hate him.
Matt, I don't want to fuel this too much in you.
I'm just saying. It's occurring to me.
One might almost call Lincoln a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief.
A man of constant sorrow.
Which is a description of Christ.
Yes. Oh,
of the
see, there you go.
servant.
I never knew that.
Okay. But you could also say that about Lincoln.
Because not only that, but he's got to deal with this war, and he's got depression, and worst of all, Mary Todd. Now imagine that. You got a dead kid, you got a sick kid, you got a kid off of the army, and then and you're running this war, and you got to deal with Mary Todd, who's like, I want new curtains for the for the us bedroom.
And thank God for my wife Diane and for Cindy.
Yeah, they're not like Mary Todd.
That's right. But also notice in this part of it that we're talking about now, the birth terms.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Our fathers brought forth, conceived, dedicated These are all parts of a life cycle early on.
Personifying the country.
Yes, right. He's talking about the country.
Yeah. This nation is being personified.
This 70 that we live and we die, we now have a country who has lived 70. And is it going to die? Because democracies are fragile and they have not lasted before. More about that later. He talks about on this continent in this section too. So not only is time a theme, but place is very important to Lincoln. What word is said most often of any word that's not like a and the?
I was going to say the.
The word here.
Ah, really?
8 times. And remember, he had a tour of this place. And remember how we feel sometimes, not every time, but we have been on this battlefield and we have felt those spirits of the great deeds that were done. And he said the world would little know nor long remember what we say here.
Yeah.
Because I'm beginning to feel those spirits from his words as they are very comforting and motivating in 2024, in our current crisis. Every crisis America goes through, people turn to Lincoln.
It regrounds us.
And it inspires us.
Sure. Here's, you know what I think? I think Lincoln knew exactly what he was doing.
Well, he might have.
And I think that little note, long remember stuff is false modesty. He knew
it could have been
that the American public, the world, would actually know more of that speech than what the men did here, because that's the way people are. And that's why, I mean, he was like the first soundbite president before there were sound bites. You know, that little speech, that short little speech.
Right.
In an age of orators like Everett, who go on for 2 hours, he goes on for 2 minutes. And he's and like Everett says, he says more than anybody else could have said.
With the words.
And that's why those newspaper reporters that wrote the bad reviews. They were jealous.
Well, and they watched the wrong news channel. Or read the wrong newspapers, right?
Right.
So these 4 little words, which are kind of the title of this, a few fitting words.
Right.
Now, those were actually from Alexander Stephens.
Yeah, now tell this story.
Well, I'll get to it. A few fitting words spoken by you now, Stephens writes to Lincoln on December 30th, 1860. What had happened the previous month? Lincoln had been elected. And what had happened early in that month of December of 1860? South Carolina left the Union. And Lincoln writes to Stephens, Alexander Stephens, who becomes the vice president of the United States. I'm sorry. Lincoln wishes, baby. Because Hannibal Hamlin was no great deal, and Andrew Johnson was definitely not. Right. But he writes to the man who will become the Confederate state vice president, Alexander Stephens, his friend that he had met in Congress. And he's asking him for, what is the situation there? Is Georgia going to go? Is it just South Carolina? He's not president yet, and he's got a friend who's a mover and shaker in Georgia politics. We'll come back to that.
Okay.
But when he says on this continent, he's talking about a place, that theme. He uses the word proposition. Lincoln was not only self-educated, he did not read broadly, but he read with depth. For instance, he didn't just read Euclid's geometries, volumes, 6 of them. He mastered them, and he thought like a geometrist. There are propositions. Did you hear that word in the speech? Dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. He thinks like a Euclidean geometrist. There are propositions, axioms that have to be proven and tested to see if they're true and to see if that proposition will be a fitting cornerstone to your government. again, teasing Alexander Stevens coming up here.
Right.
Okay. Also listen for the word liberty was in this little section, but freedom is another way to look at it. And frankly, if I had one word for myself to use to summarize the speech, it would be liberty. That's at the heart of it for Lincoln.
Yeah. Okay.
There's the centrality of the Declaration of Independence in Lincoln's thinking. Let me go here. February 22nd. What date is that? February 22nd.
It's after the 21st.
Yeah, good. It's Washington's birthday.
Oh, that too.
And we used to know that because when I was young, we had two separate holidays.
Right. Okay? Lincoln's birthday and
Lincoln's
Washington's. Right.
And Washington's.
Right.
But Lincoln is on his way to be inaugurated on February 22nd. He's in Philadelphia. He is at Independence Hall. And he says, all the political sentiments I entertain have been drawn, so far as I've been able to draw them, from the sentiments which originated and were given to the world from this hall. I have never had a feeling politically that did not spring from the sentiments embodied in the Declaration of Independence.
Uh-huh.
That is central to his thinking.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just because he happened to be in Independence Hall at the time. He says this in many other places in his speeches before this too.
I'm glad to hear that because when people ask me, are you liberal Democrat or are you liberal or conservative or are you a Democrat or Republican or whatever, and I go, I don't know, whatever the person who believes in the Declaration of Independence is, that's what I believe.
Right.
And whatever that falls under. And it's neither.
Man, we've jumped to the end. And
Yes.
if you're tired,
I am exhausted.
Okay.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
because the last point, the relevance of it today, we'll just do that now. And if we have time, I'll just remind you. I love giving the free cemetery talks in the summer. I wait anxiously for 8 o'clock in the morning when we guides are allowed to sign up. And thank you, Fran. He even let me sign up for the 4th of July this year ahead of time.
Uh-huh.
Because I love those talks.
Yeah.
Especially now. I'm giving a tour of the cemetery. And of course, a major part of that tour is the speech. And I usually stand where now, I believe from Christopher Oakley's research, Lincoln would have been standing. Because that's in the National Cemetery.
Yeah.
And I will deliver the speech. And there's one of two things that happens afterwards. Either a silence, and then sometimes you hear people say, wow. I've heard people say, I wish we had a leader. No, I don't hear that.
Good, I'm glad.
I've heard people say, I wish we had a leader like that now.
Yeah. I wish we've had a leader like that since.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. Or at least within recent history. But sometimes there's just silence, and sometimes there's people just break out spontaneously in applause. And it's not for me. I know that. It's for Lincoln. And I'll say that. I'll say, I know, right?
Yeah.
The guy was genius.
Yeah, he was.
And that those words can elicit that response today. I'll say, people talk that we'll have another civil war. And I don't think so. Because what unites us as Americans is so much greater than what divides us in this crowd. And there might be 100 people. In this crowd, probably half of you voted for Trump and half of you voted for Biden. And yet here we are, unified behind this concept that all men are created equal.
And by the way, I'll bet you that there were certain points where people clapped and Maybe they voted for Trump. Maybe they voted for Biden or Harris. You know, Harris is the one that just ran, not Biden.
Well, I know, but I haven't done it since this election, okay?
So, but my point is, I think people clap. And I bet if you actually talked to them and found their politics, you would find that they're on both sides of the spectrum.
Oh, absolutely.
Because people hear words like Lincoln's in the context of the Gettysburg Address, and they think the other side is the threat.
Right.
And so they're like, here, yes, we've got to do that because, you know, my side, X, believes that the other side is the threat. And that is how amazing that speech is, but also how stupid we are as a people.
Right. My hope is that it can unify.
And that's why people think we're headed for a civil war, is because people hear the same speech about unity.
I know. I had a guy,
and they think the other guy is the reason.
I had a guy come up to me after one of the tours I gave this summer in the cemetery.
Yeah.
And he came real close to my ear and he just whispered, "I know you can't tell me this, but who are you supporting?" And I no. And then from more things he's telling me about himself, I realized
he wasn't supporting who you were supporting.
No, that we were on opposite sides. But that's the genius of it.
I know.
That's my hope, because I believe we have more things that unite us than we have that divide us.
And I think that's what he was saying, even as we were split up, killing each other. I think he was still saying that we have more in common.
Lincoln, yeah.
Lincoln. Yeah, not the guy that came up to you.
The mystic chords of memory that reach across the battlefields.
Yes.
And we have so many more. 161 more years of mystic chords of memories for our better angels to touch.
Yes. Yes.
And I'm thankful. Here we are in November, and we did not have a contested election. Right. I'm literally thankful for God. I'm not.
Yep.
Well,
it's not over yet. Give us time. Yeah, you know.
Right.
Let's see. Let's see.
We'll see. But things are going better that way. But this is part of the context of the speech. This Declaration of Independence.
So, okay, we got the Declaration of Independence. Now, let's parse the speech, because this is such a great speech. I think it's fun to parse. Let's go through it, and let's get the peanut gallery involved.
Well, join peanut gallery, because that's what I'm doing. I'm just going through. So you guys jump in whenever.
Yeah, why don't one of you get near Colby and the other one come in the room here on mic 3. All right, I'll turn the camera around. I don't know if Colby's been using that angle, but we'll do it there. We'll make it a group. Bob's a teacher, so he's used to a classroom. So don't all jump in at once. Don't everybody rush.
Jesus. I have to ask you, Bob.
Most recently, I taught college kids too. So
there you go.
I had some people.
Oh, Colby has your chair
more than you guys.
Just grab.
Go
something.
ahead, Colby.
What's the question, Bob?
Colby.
I wonder, is there, like, you know, Matt, you said one of your favorite things about it is how pithy it is, how he uses as few amount of words as possible, and it makes me think of Ernest Hemingway. I've heard this story where he and his author buddies got together and they wanted to see who could write the best story with the fewest words.
Yeah.
Have you heard this where he talks about? I think his story ends up being a pair of baby shoes for sale, only been worn once. And that's the whole story. And it leaves you impacted. I think there is something magical, too, in the fact that Lincoln does choose to use as few words as possible. Because from the research I've done on Lincoln, Lincoln liked to talk. Lincoln liked to spin yarn and tell stories. And he again, back to that humility, he has the humility to realize that dragging this out with my own language or expanding on my thoughts with greater amounts of words is not going to be the way to get a point across. You know, I need to get down to the core of what I'm trying to say. And just like the Bible, how people can read it over and over and over again, and every time they read it, they find some new layer of what they're reading. How important do you think it was that this speech is the length it is? You know?
Oh, very. It's short enough to be memorized.
Yeah.
And there was a time in American history when it was an assignment that you had to memorize.
I had to do it. I think we all had to do it at school. I don't know when they stopped doing that, but I don't know. They might still.
And like memorizing scripture, if it's there in your head and you can't sleep in the middle of the night, you think about it. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and that's what I've been doing for the last few years in preparation for the presentation I made at the Convention for Braver Angels, but also for this now. Been thinking about the speech, and just last night, this comparison to the Lord's Prayer. By the way, it's at the end too. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever
and ever.
Yeah.
That government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish.
The triad, that's called?
A triad, right. And ending with forever, or shall not perish.
Amen. Here, Cindy, I printed that out for you so that you can see the text there as we go through it. Okay, so let's go through it here. We already did the first stanza, if you will.
We did the first sentence.
Stanza.
Yeah, we did the first sentence. So if you guys want to chime in on that, 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. I'm about ready to go on.
Let's move on because,
Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. Notice now there's a tense change.
Right.
We went from the past to the present.
But also, I look at that as he's reminding us, or them, of their place in time in the history of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Testing whether that nation, a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created, or any nation so conceived, so our nation, or if any other one comes along and, this way, can long endure. Yeah, you could start, you can go, you could have a couple of decades of fun, but can you last? Can you go on?
Right. Absolutely.
And, okay.
Anybody else?
I see. I mean, if I chime in anymore, it's just going to turn into a show about the Bible.
The Marines. There is, but that's like we were talking before, Colby. Like that's the time that he was.
It is. I mean,
everything
people,
was the Bible.
People were so much more enthralled in their faith, and
yeah, that's for you, Eric. That's printing out. If you want to look on there, you guys can share that. But go ahead.
I just. I think that these words, because a lot of people don't research Lincoln the way Matt might, or Bob might, or like I do. I have my own history podcast that I had to research Lincoln on extensively, and without doing that, I think it goes over a lot of people's head how singular Lincoln is. He makes me believe in the great man theory, right? Like no one else in history does except Lincoln. I don't think there is any other person that has lived before him, after him, or in his time that could have done what he did.
Oh, Washington.
I don't think Washington could have. No? I do not think George Washington could have got this country through the Civil War.
I agree with Colby.
Oh, I don't think he could have got through the Civil War, but he was a great man of his time.
He was a great man, but it's.
I understand what you're saying. It's not Lincoln. No.
Yeah,
no.
Just and I think these words bring into focus how great and how tuned into what he was, how great of a man he was, and how tuned into exactly what he was doing. I mean, he did just lose one of his children a year before this in a terrible way. He's had no time to grieve it. He's been dealing with Mary Todd, who is a nightmare. I mean, she's going back and forth from locking herself into a room wailing, and then and like Matt said, wanting to buy crazy things. She's all over the place. He's losing the war in the East, except for the Battle of Gettysburg. The war in the West is looking good, but he's still losing fights in Georgia. He's got riots going on in New York City, and he has the focus like someone that has, like Job, has his eye on God. He cannot be distracted from the ultimate point, and is willing to pay any sacrifice he has to personally to get there.
Because he knows his purpose.
It seems as though, I mean, I think.
And by the way, he's also signing new laws that have nothing to do with the war. Like he's still managing the country outside of the war.
Sure.
I mean, it's
amazing things. The Pacific Railroad Act.
Was it with the Homestead Act? Was that him?
The Homestead Act.
It's nuts.
Yeah.
Nuts.
Yeah.
All right.
Things go on.
All right. So
let me ask this.
Yeah.
He says, now we are engaged in a great civil war. Give me another
You're thinking
word.
of marriage.
No, give me another word besides engaged that one might have written.
Embroiled. I would have said embroiled.
Okay.
Most people would have said we are fighting a civil war.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Sure. What? Involved.
Yeah. But what's the reason you think engaged might be a better word?
That's a good question. That is a good question.
Because it was a conscious decision to engage in this war to try to preserve this great experiment.
Is that the answer you were looking for? Because I like that answer.
I'm looking for discussion.
Well, I like that answer because we could have just let the South go. He could have just let the South go.
Many people wanted him to.
Many people wanted him to, but he chose to not. We have chosen to engage in this great civil war to test whether that nation. I don't.
And compare engaging to being involved. Doesn't engaging take more energy, more intensity?
Engaging is something to Colby's point, engaging is something that you choose to do.
Yes.
Think about you get engaged.
You get engaged to be married.
You choose to do that.
Well, and also
involved is something that happens to you.
Well, and also, what do they call a battle?
An engagement.
Right.
It's because you're
ironically,
locked in
they also refer to getting married as an engagement.
But you're locked into an extreme ordeal that takes all of your focus and all of your effort, and it's an engagement is something that you're not going to pull out of at the first sign of trouble. An engagement is something you're going to see through to the very end.
Right. Yes, you're committed.
Matt,
it's a commitment. Yes.
Could you show people on the linking?
I'm on it right now.
You are with the color ones. I think that's the one we printed out for Cindy there. Okay.
Yes.
So I just want you all to see something about Lincoln's brilliance in terms of being a speechwriter and maker. He has these self-referential words. That's Gary Will's word for it. That will take us through the Gettysburg Address. And in each paragraph or each section or each sentence, he will introduce a word. The first section, the first part only has one because it's the first. A new nation is in blue. Yeah. And then the second part, which we're now talking about, now we're engaged in a great civil war. See, that blue is repeated again, whether that nation. So he referred to a new nation, and now in the next section, he's saying that nation, and he's drawing us in.
He's building on.
But he also introduces another word that he'll pick up in the next section. Right, we're engaged in a great civil war. And then in the next section, there it is, that war in red.
Yeah. And then
he introduces battlefield. And in the next section, he refers to that field.
Yeah.
And he introduces dedicate. Can you scroll down a little bit more?
Sure. I can scroll.
And then in the next section, there's dedicate. And he introduces consecrate. Yeah. And scroll down. In the next section, he introduces the people who struggled here. Yep. And he's tying in with the previous with consecrate. You see how this goes? Yep. And then there's dedicated again. By the way, dedicated or dedicate is used 6 times.
Yeah.
No wonder it sounds kind of religious.
He was dedicated to that word.
Yeah, he was, wasn't he? And here we see those who fought here, which is a connection to the earlier, those who struggled here. And then there's dedicated again. And then he introduces these honored dead. And in the next section, he refers to these dead again. And that's the last section. So this is the linking of words that he uses. And whether this was, again, conscious or whether this was just his intuitive genius, I don't know, but it was.
He's like a Victorian rapper.
Oh, I like this, Matt. Go with that.
I would like to see you.
Can you do it as a rap star?
No, I want you to start doing that on your cemetery tours. Colby could go as your beatbox.
I'll beatbox
do
for
it.
you.
Beatbox now, and let's see if Bob can do it.
School.
Okay, please stop. Please stop.
Hey, Matt, I have you to thank for a curse that I have every time at those cemetery tours. Every time I start reading Timothy O'Hara's The Bivouac of the Dead. And can you guess what
Gilligan's
that curse
Island.
is? Yes.
I know. A lot of people don't, this is an old show, but it's Tim Smith and Roy Frampton. We were on East Cemetery Hill. And that's when they taught us that you could sing The Bivouac of the Dead, the words The Bivouac of the Dead, which is the poem that's on the plaques all around the cemetery. Each one of them works to the melody of the Gilligan's Island theme song.
Yeah, it does.
Which kind of really is sad.
It's a curse. I cannot. It's a beautiful poem, and yet I hear it. I hear it in my
It's
head.
a wonderful poem, and then it's now it's just a cheesy 60s sitcom theme song.
Yeah.
It's awful. All right, but listen, let's continue.
Go ahead.
Okay, so we met on a great battlefield of that war.
Well, hang on.
Yeah.
Because if I don't do this piece, you're
Okay.
going to be mad at me because I've been teasing it all along.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
The Alexander Stevens piece.
Yes.
The words testing whether that nation can long endure.
Okay.
Remember, he thinks like a geometrist.
Right.
Propositions, now they're being tested in this great civil war. What
right.
proposition? The proposition that all men are created equal. First of all, democracy, I'm going to quote Donald Keegan, who wrote about Pericles and Athenian democracy, arguably the first democracy in the world. Mm-hmm. He's a historian. He calls democracy one of the rarest, most delicate and fragile flowers in the jungle of human existence. And it is.
Which is the genius of the founders in that they didn't give us one.
Right. But how long will it last? 70? Or 80? If you think about it, Greece didn't last that long.
But they had a pure democracy.
Well,
right?
It depends on what you mean by pure democracy.
Where it was just popular vote, or,
It was the beginning.
Yeah.
And then the Roman Republic. But what did the Roman Republic become?
An empire.
An empire. Yeah.
A divided empire.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And then there's Haiti, a slave revolt.
Mm-hmm.
And that democracy just was a bloody mess, even at this time. France, the French Revolution.
Oui, oui.
But also descended into a bloody mess in Napoleon. Right?
Right.
Democracies don't last very long. And that's part of the context here.
I wonder, though, right, that's right, exactly. But I also wonder, on all those other examples, a democracy, like a democracy is not a democracy is not a democracy. Like, in other words, there's more to it than just how much voting power people have. You have to have rights. You have to have civil rights. You know what I mean? Like you have to have redress against your government. We have those things, but not every country that is considered a modern democracy, quote unquote, has a First Amendment, for example. Mm-hmm. And their politicians talk about free speech, but there really isn't anything that I'm aware of in their governing documents that says you have this right.
But do they have a king? Or
no, not right.
And that's
they're figureheads. But
every nation in the world is being ruled by a monarch.
Yeah.
Or, Napoleon's no longer around.
Right.
But there's been that precedent too. But people ruling, whether there's a Bill of Rights or not, and how it works its way out, is it a constitutional monarchy like England has? Because we would have to say England was a democracy, even though they had a monarch. The people had power. I mean,
sure.
Charles lost his head. So.
Right. Which is power to the people.
Right. People had power.
Yeah.
So, but that's very rare in the history of the world in the context of this speech.
Yes.
And Lincoln is contemplating how long do governments last.
But I guess that's what I'm saying is in the history of the world, he has nothing to compare us to because we're not like any of those other things.
Well, and then the thing
we're the exception to the rule.
The thing you're also not accounting for too is this is the first. I mean, to my knowledge, this is the first nation that is also founded under the Judeo-Christian faith, right? Like it is in our opening doctrines, our opening statements. One nation under God. It is clear to those. I mean, the people that come over on the Mayflower come here to be able to worship the way they want to worship. And I think because of that, it is so intertwined. The Judeo-Christian faith is so intertwined in the minds of everybody that has, whether it's penning the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution.
I'm sorry, am I talking? Why am I on the camera?
Oh, jeez. Or I'm looking at you. or Abraham Lincoln in this time and the rest of the people in this time. I do think I know this country is for religious freedom. I'm not saying that. I do think, though, there is that factor to it also, because there's a certain level of honesty and a certain level of, we talked about George Washington. George Washington having the foresight to know, I have to stop being the president, otherwise I will become the monarch, right? Mm-hmm. And that will ruin whatever we just started here. I think that in a weird way that ties into Christianity.
Oh, I agree with you. He's humbled. If he was, I don't know, if he didn't have that.
Right. If he was just a man of the world with no faith, I don't think you see the same outcome.
Yeah,
I think that's how you end up with Napoleon in France.
Or Saddam Hussein. You pretend to have faith. Right? You pretend to have faith because the people that you want to rule do.
Right.
But you don't show it in the way you act.
Right.
I don't know. I think it's definitely, we're completely influenced by that. Right. But the beauty that the founders had was they said, but we're not going to have an official religion. We're not going to establish. We're not going to endorse. We're separate.
But there are certain principles that we hold to be self-evident, like all men are created equal and they're endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Notice that's a triad, by the way.
Right. It's a lot of
Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Holy, holy, holy. Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
It's more effective in threes.
It's more effective in threes, absolutely. And we see that in this speech, that and dualities too. But let's get to the ideological context here. What a government is going to be based upon. Because Alexander Stephens, Lincoln's friend, will write a letter to Lincoln on December 30th, and in that, he's talking about trying to save our common country. Remember, Lincoln and Stephens were friends, but Stephens will become, he doesn't know it yet, the Confederate vice president.
Uh-huh. Do I have this? Did you send me this letter?
No. Okay. Well, I might have. I don't remember.
I don't think you did. No, you didn't. Okay, go ahead.
So, in this letter, December 30th, 1860, he's responding to Lincoln sending him a response, okay? And if you want, I got that stuff I can get to, but we're going to run out of time.
Yeah.
He says, we must work together basically to save our common country. Stephens suggested, quote, a word fitly spoken by you now would be like apples of gold in pitchers of silver. And, Matt, that is... I don't know if it's a slide I sent you. Yes, it was. It's slide number 2.
Uh-huh.
Okay, slide number 2.
All right, let me just get into the people. Now, you wrote pictures, not pictures.
Right, because that's the way it appears in Proverbs 25.
Okay, I thought that was a...
Now, go to the picture number 3. That's the next slide right after that.
Beautiful.
Okay, there is the quote from Proverbs 25 in the King James Version. And there's apples of gold in a pitcher of silver.
Okay, so in the description, I wrote pitcher because I was picturing a silver pitcher. I'm like, why would you put apples in a pitcher? But it's the Bible, whatever. But you're saying pictures of silver. So in other words, a picture made out of silver and then the apples are gold?
So let's see. I don't have it here. Yes. Let me see what slide number I gave it for you. Look at number 4. Look at the next one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like silver engravings.
Right. Look at the frame.
Yeah.
It says, we the people of the United States. It's the Constitution. And what is the gold? It's the Declaration of Independence, which came 11 years before the Constitution. Now, go to that.
Okay.
So Lincoln doesn't respond to, let me pick that up here because I won't be able to read it there. Lincoln doesn't respond to, come on, well, here it is. Lincoln doesn't respond to that letter. He's on his way to become president of the United States, right?
He's got other things to worry about.
But he does write a speech fragment. This is Lincoln. I love the guy. I do the same thing. I'll find a piece of scrap paper. I don't know, the scrap from someone else. And I got an idea. I got to write it down.
Sure.
I'll wake up in the middle of the night sometimes as I'm writing. I got to write that down.
Like Keith Richards.
And I got to play with it.
Yeah.
Okay, I got to play with it. Lincoln did this a lot. There's a whole section in his collected works called Speech Fragments that he never delivered. This was one that we think was originally delivered or originally written in January of 1861, or perhaps while he was preparing his inaugural, but he doesn't deliver this speech now. Stevens asked for a few words fitly spoken. I think the Gettysburg Address is the answer.
A couple years later.
A couple years later.
But he had to
because
think about
listen to what Lincoln says.
Bless you.
Thank you.
I, for the sake of time, I'm going to like the second paragraph, and I already cut this out, some things. The expression of that principle, you see where I am? Right there. See, the expression of that principle in our Declaration of Independence was most happy and fortunate. I think I heard Colby say something like that a few minutes ago.
He did, but I think he was talking about when he saw a movie that he liked.
Continue. The assertion of that principle at that time was the word, quote, fitly spoken. Now, was this speech fragment triggered by a letter he got earlier that month from his friend Alexander Stevens?
Right.
I got to believe it was. That was the word fitly spoken, which has proved, quote, an quote, apple of gold to us.
Oh, wow.
The Union and the Constitution are the picture of silver, subsequently framed around it.
I love
that. The picture was made not to conceal or destroy the apple, but to adorn and preserve it. The picture was made for the apple, not the apple for the picture. So let us act that neither picture nor apple shall ever be blurred or bruised or broken.
Threes.
Shall not perish from the earth.
And does not Lincoln try? He's not perfect about staying within the bounds of the Constitution, suspending sometimes the writ of habeas corpus and
do
things.
what you got to do in a war.
But he cares for that silver picture frame. He might have to stretch it to protect the apple. He might have to use constitutional military powers as commander-in-chief to emancipate the slaves. But is that enough? No, and he knows it's not enough, so he continues to work for the passage of the 13th Amendment as well. So stay within the silver frame.
Yeah, you know what I love about this is it's, he obviously improves on it in the Gettysburg Address, right? Because he's essentially saying this, but not saying it. Mm-hmm. And even though this is just kind of, I'm guessing, his first thoughts in response to that he jots down, it's beautiful.
Isn't it?
Like, the guy's a brilliant bastard.
The most incredible line in that whole thing, I've never seen this. This is kind of blowing my mind a little bit, but the picture was not made to conceal or destroy the apple, but to adorn and preserve it. The picture was made for the apple, not the apple for the picture. Right. What Lincoln does right there is he says, this country is not what we have created, this country, this framework, that's not the prize. The prize is all men are created equal. Right. That is the purpose we're here. We're not here. That's the difference between America and every other country we were just talking about, right?
Amen.
It's not about what we can possess or what we can gain from our own lands, right? Our own freedoms. It's so that we can lift up the people that live here, and so that everybody at least has, the unalienable rights, right? Like, everybody starts out with the right to pursuit of happiness. They are created equal under the eyes of their creator.
Right.
And he's shifting the focus. It's so easy, especially if you consider that, he's writing this at the time the war is starting. It's so easy to think, well, if we don't want to, I don't want to be a part of that experiment anymore, talking as the South, we're going to come do our own thing. We're willing to fight to do our own thing, but they've lost focus on the fact that the real purpose of this nation is not our borders. It's not our economy. It's not the slave trade. It is that all men are created equal. And that's the reason we're coming here in the first place.
Right.
They all have the right to worship equally. They all have the right to express themselves equally, and they all have the right to pursuit of happiness. He's a genius. I mean, Lincoln is 100% a genius.
He gets it, I think, better than most people at the time got it. And I think he's really like the leader. He's saying, come along with me. This is what we must do.
And I'm sorry.
And when you deal with somebody who knows their purpose, it's different.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to coax and cajole. You can just hear and see that they believe what they're telling you. And it's mesmerizing. And you go.
Like Hancock on Cemetery Hill on July 1st.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Gary Wills, Lincoln, there's a number of books I have here that I won't bore people just by showing them, but Lincoln at Gettysburg.
No, they're going to want to know. So at the end, we're going to go through the book. We're just going to name the books.
Okay.
But then we got to get back to the speech and breaking it down. Yeah. Okay.
And we're not even done yet with Alexander Stevens. And why I emphasize the word all men are created equal.
Okay. That's at the beginning.
Lincoln was castigated. We could talk about this now. We'll talk about it later for referring to the Declaration of Independence and not the Constitution. There were those who severely criticized him in print for appealing to something other than our founding document, the Constitution of the United States. And he's basically saying, no, that's not our founding document. The principle that our country was founded on is in the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
This is what Gary Wills said. This is, I'm quoting I better put my glasses on, page 174 of Lincoln at Gettysburg by Gary Wills. This was the perfect medium for changing the way most Americans thought about the nation's founding acts. Lincoln does not argue law or history as Daniel Webster did. He makes history. He does not come to present a theory, but to impose a symbol, one tested in experience and appealing to national values, with an emotional urgency entirely expressed in calm abstractions, fire and ice. He came to change the world, to effect an intellectual revolution. No other words could have done it. The miracle is that these words did. In his brief time before the crowd at Gettysburg, he wove a spell that has not yet been broken. He called up a new nation out of the blood and trauma.
You know why I love Lincoln? I think I figured it out. Because I love my country.
Yes.
And if it weren't for Lincoln, I wouldn't have it.
Right.
He didn't give it to us. He saved it.
Right. And at the heart is the belief that all men are created equal. Now, that's the cornerstone of our government. Listen to what his friend Alexander Stevens said a few months later, after Lincoln has written this speech fragment of Golden Apple and Silver Pitcher.
Mm-hmm. March 21st, 1861.
Right. And I don't know if you're going to put my copy up there. You don't need to, but I've got some stuff in yellow if you go that far. So
I'll find it
in the speech, and it's quite a ways down in the
yellow
speech.
Or blue.
Well, go to after the blue.
Okay, there we go.
I got it highlighted in yellow, and it says those ideas, however. Now, those ideas that he's talking about are the idea that all men are created equal.
Right.
And this is easily accessible online. It's Alexander Stevens' Cornerstone speech. So what does he say? Those ideas, however, were fundamentally wrong. The ideas we're just talking about are fundamentally wrong. They rested upon the assumption of the equality of the races. This was an error. It was a sandy foundation, and the government built upon it fell when the storm came and the wind blew. And Colby, what's that a reference to?
I will build my house upon this rock.
On the rock, the cornerstone. Yes, from the Sermon on the Mount, the end of the Sermon on the Mount.
I thought you were going to say it was a Skinner song.
No. Our new government, Alexander Stevens goes on to say, is founded upon exactly the opposite idea. Its foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery subordination to the superior race is his natural and normal condition. Now, I'm going to fast forward a little bit through some more blue.
Okay.
We had more time. We do a little bit more of this. To some more yellow. I think I have some more.
More yellow or more large font? May we not, therefore, look with confidence to the ultimate universal acknowledgement of the truths upon which our system rests?
Oh, okay. Then
that one?
Yeah. Yeah, there it is.
Okay.
Yes, right.
So you want to go ahead and read that?
May we not, therefore, look with confidence to the ultimate universal acknowledgement of the truths upon which our system rests? It is the first government ever instituted upon the principles in strict conformity to nature and the ordination of providence. Ooh, there's a Christian talking about the same God that Lincoln is talking about, providence, in furnishing the materials of human society. Skip a little bit. With with us, all of the white race, however, high or low, rich or poor, are equal in the eyes of the law. Not so with the Negro. Subordination is his place. He, by nature or by the curse against Canaan, is fitted for that condition which he occupies in our system. Let me go a little bit further down. The stone which was rejected by the first builders, and this is another biblical reference from King James, from Jesus, is become the chief of the corner, the real cornerstone in our new edifice. So it's called the Cornerstone speech because he's saying this Confederate States government is based upon this scientific belief. Now, he didn't say scientific,
right?
But what great scientist talking about cultural context is sweeping the world at this point? Darwin and social Darwinianism is what he has adopted as the truth, the scientific fact. Testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure.
But Bob, I just have to say, though, the war wasn't about slavery.
Oh, okay, fine.
Okay.
Fine.
They were just...
But they seceded.
They were just protecting their homes.
But they seceded because of slavery.
No, it wasn't even that. It was just they were protecting.
He's messing with you.
I know he is. Believe me, Colby, I've known this guy long enough. He loves to poke me.
It's because we were down there. That's all.
Yeah. To which I usually say in a tour, yeah, well, why were you all up here in Pennsylvania in the summer of '63 then? It was not a war of northern aggression.
To get slaves.
There you go.
And cherries.
But can you see where I'm going with this? One of the contexts of this speech, and I think perhaps the greatest context, is this contest of ideas. Are all men created equal or are they not? And this is why I emphasize the word, all men are created equal.
So let me challenge something there.
All right, Eric, coming with a challenge.
Eric.
Because this is what I do. I always
Eric, by the way, believes that the war was not about slavery. Go ahead, Eric.
That's not true at all.
Move closer to the mic.
So if we're really looking at that comment, all men are created equal, are we then assuming, because I don't necessarily believe that Lincoln did believe all men are created equal, or he believed all white men are created equal. I think he believed all black men deserved a certain amount of things, a certain amount of rights. But didn't Lincoln also believe that black people were inferior to white people?
You know, Eric, it's funny you say that because I got in an argument with a lost causer the other day who said the same exact thing. Bob?
I wouldn't mind trying to tackle this a little bit just from my understanding of Lincoln when I studied him and see what Bob thinks about this.
But wait, before you do, can I pose another thing, another or there, Eric? Or is he saying, well, we don't have to believe this shit, but the next generation has to? In other words, it's a challenge to future generations that you guys have to believe that all men are created equal. We'll just bring the country back together. You finish all that later on down the road, because that's the typical American tradition of kicking the can down the road, right? Thank you. So that's an or. I don't know. Go ahead.
I see what you think about this, Bob, because this is kind of what I've gathered about Lincoln. I don't think Lincoln ever believed in slavery. I think he was on the riverboats that went down to Mississippi when he was a young man, saw it firsthand, and I think it scarred him from that point on. I think he had a very negative outlook on the entire institution. I do, everybody's heard about Lincoln suggesting maybe we send them to a different country, them being African Americans, send them to a different country. He came up with all these different things, but you have to remember that Lincoln was trying to keep the country together. And this war was first started about keeping the Union. Lincoln had to transition from the Union to the cause of doing away with slavery halfway through the war. I do think Lincoln deep down in his heart believed that all men were created equal. And you can tie this back into the Old Testament where slavery you can tie this back into the Old Testament where slavery is clearly in the Bible. But even slaves have the right, before God to be considered equal to all men, right? Just because of their status as a slave in the Old Testament doesn't mean they're inferior race. That's their position in life. I think that Lincoln knew the world he was living in, knew the world he inhabited, knew that he had to mend this country, right? You think about the story of the prodigal son, and the big thing, the big complaint with the prodigal son is the son that does good the entire time and never leaves home is really not given the benefit of the doubt, But the prodigal son returns. He's a fat lamb is slaughtered. There's a big celebration, on and on and on and on. I think it's easy to look at Lincoln's suggestions and some of the courses he thought about going down with I guess kind of a negative lens nowadays. But he's trying to get that prodigal son to return. The South, he's trying to get the South to return back into the fold. And it's not until it reaches a certain, climax in the war where he feels that he has the potential to be able to get what he sees as morally right accomplished, which is ending slavery. Would you agree with that, Bob? Am I somewhere in the right ballpark there?
Yeah, I think more though. I think it's impossible to view correctly Lincoln through 21st century eyes.
Yeah,
he makes comments which are awfully offensive to us. I mean, you mentioned the colonization effort. Frederick Douglass. He drove him crazy sometimes, but in the end, Douglass saw him as a man better than any man who was able to lead the country in a direction that it otherwise would not have gone, the great man theory that you were talking about before. So I'm not saying that Lincoln was not in some ways a racist. Did he believe in the social equality? Well, you listen to some of the speeches he made when he's running for the Senate seat in Illinois, in Southern Illinois in particular, which was a butternut section, which was, more more slavery sympathetic, but more Confederate sympathetic too. Some of the things he says down there in Southern Illinois are they raise my cackles. So no, he does not necessarily believe in the social equality. Lincoln would not be one like Thaddeus Stevens to sleep with a black woman, right?
Right.
I mean, if that's true,
he had Mary Todd in the way.
Well, okay. But so he wasn't perfect by our standards, but we can't judge people by 21st century standards. He was way ahead of his time.
And I would say this, going back to, my challenge, and I actually, I believe more to what Matt, your oar of being the correct thing.
Kicking the can down the road?
What's that?
Kicking the can down the road?
In some ways, I think he had, I think in many ways, in listening to the discussion here tonight, there's a lot of, we tend to give Lincoln these otherworldly abilities to know and see and do all and be all things and be this near perfect human. And he clearly wasn't. And I don't think there's, to Bob's point, and I'm not trying to look at him through a 21st century. Our terminology, our beliefs now are much different than what they were. He clearly was a man of his time. Mm-hmm. He believed what the majority of people believed at his time. Maybe he had enough foresight, though, to see where things were going to go and where things were going to become. Now, do I believe that he believed all men were created equal? No, I don't really believe he didn't. I believe maybe he was more progressive for his time than others of his time. Yeah. But also in that term, all men were, he probably clearly meant all men and men only were created equal. Yeah. And women weren't a part of that. So looking at it now from a 21st century lens, we automatically read all men are created equal and translate that to be all people are created equal. I think he said what he meant to say. And I think he used it the way he meant to use it because it referenced back to, back to the Declaration of Independence and the thought of what we were founded on and our, we talked about the foundational pieces of the government. But I think he believed in a very 1863 way of what that meant. But I do believe, to Matt's point, that he saw where we could go and what it could become if we continued to grow
Right.
as a nation and growing as a people. He clearly did not like slavery. I think he's made a lot of comments throughout time, throughout the years that, he made different comments about slavery. I think he was clearly against slavery, but there is there's a difference between your disagreement with slavery and your belief that all black people are equal at that time.
But the point is, for Lincoln, what our government has to be based on is this belief, whether you believe in social equality or not. He says in the Peoria speech, if the Negro is a man, why then my ancient faith teaches me that, quote, all men are created equal, and that there can be no moral right in connection with one man's making a slave of another. No man is good enough to govern another man without that other's consent. I say this is the leading principle, the sheet anchor of American republicanism. Our Declaration of Independence says, and then he quotes it, ending up with, deserving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Deriving, sorry, that's right.
Well, it has to do with the intrinsic value of life, right? Maybe they're not socially equal, but every man their life has an intrinsic value in the eyes of the Creator.
Every man, and Lincoln, this is at his heart and soul. Every man, whether he's going to attain what Lincoln did, born in poverty and ending up president of the United States, that's not equal. I am not Abraham Lincoln's equal. I was born in middle class, and I'm staying in middle class, and no one's going to remember me much except my family and those I might have influenced in teaching.
But you have the chance.
That's it. That's the point. You have to give these people the opportunity to use their wherewithal as best they can, hard work and whatever talents they've been given, to rise up. And if you don't, you are violating the principle of the consent of the governed, which is also in the Declaration of Independence preamble.
And there's another quote,
and that'll destroy America.
There's another quote from Lincoln that I've seen online a lot, and I never actually took the time to see if he actually said it or if it's there's like a joke about Lincoln saying like all these quotes that he never said. Mm-hmm. But did he ever really say those who would deny liberty or freedom, I can't remember which word, for others deserve it not for themselves? Is that in this speech? Because it kind of sounds like he was getting there, but I didn't see it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have all of the Peoria speech. That's what I was going for.
But is that his? Did he say that? Or
you're going at? He's also the one who said, "I prefer despotism, unfiltered or whatever."
Right.
Like Russia.
Might as well move to Russia. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Then all these things.
Okay.
But it's all men are created with equal rights, not that they're socially equal.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, right. The playing field is level. It's just, what are you going to make out of it?
There's no equity, right? There's no equality of outcome.
Correct.
Right. And that's an important point, because today some people think everyone has to have equality of outcome.
Which is
impossible.
And that's not what Lincoln's saying.
No.
That's not the cornerstone of the country there.
Right. It's not. It's that they be treated equal, that they have equal opportunity. But if you're lazy,
right.
Too bad, buddy.
Yeah.
You had the opportunity.
And by the way, it's only the lazy people among us who want equal outcome.
Well,
because you don't want to, well, I mean, it is. It's like you want to get what you haven't earned, but meanwhile, someone else is willing to put in the work, and you get to get the same thing as they do. That's nonsense.
Right. Hey, Matt, your quote,
yes.
Those who deny freedom to others deserve it not for themselves, and under a just God cannot long retain it.
Yes.
Abraham Lincoln said that in a letter to H.L. Pierce on April 6, 1859.
There you go. He did say it. Thank God, because I love that quote. And that's true.
April of 59. Okay.
Yeah.
So he hasn't, he's lost the Illinois Senate seat. He hasn't been nominated by the Republicans yet, but that's great. Thank you for that.
All right. Now we really must move along, because I have to edit this and upload it before the night is through.
You might get
Cindy is looking at me
this.
like, look at her. She's very angry.
I'm not, but I've been off, so.
I'll take, if it helps, I'll take Matt home. Are you guys in the same car?
No.
Okay.
No, but Cindy, so you're new to all of this stuff since we started dating. You really never got into this, and now you're surrounded by it constantly. I'm sorry about that. But I noticed you were looking down at the text of the speech here. What are your thoughts on it now that you're looking at it in front of you? What thoughts do you have?
My thoughts are that I'm a terrible student, but
why? Because you didn't memorize this in 5th grade?
We didn't. No.
Yeah. Well, that's not your fault.
Or I'm just a terrible student and I don't remember doing so.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know that I have many thoughts on it. I always enjoy a perspective of learning the meaning behind things. So I am enjoying listening to it. I've just been looking up interesting facts about it. And it's basically saying the same thing about how, there were some critics because he was alluding more to the Declaration of Independence, whereas others thought that they should be fighting for the Constitution. And he was talking about the Declaration of Independence. So it's interesting.
But it is interesting because the Constitution is the ensconcing of the principles into law, right? Like the principles of the Declaration of Independence are what we put forth to say, this is why we're breaking away from the mother country. This is what we believe should be and already is, and it should be, this is what we want. And then when we finally win that freedom, now we've got to put it into law. We have the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, and that's the legal document.
Right.
Which
is a bundle of compromises over all sorts of issues.
Whereas the Declaration is the catalyst and it's
the ethos.
It's engulfed in the passion that these people at the time were feeling to make them want to go to war for their freedom to begin with. Right. Yeah. It's the truest sense of what they wanted to go for.
Right.
Right. What they were willing to fight for, because all the guys that signed that document were realistically, we're looking at death. They were looking at a traitor's death.
Hell yeah.
So like you have to think, you earlier, Bob, you spoke about last words and having a good death and like your family being there, and you want your last words to be something profound. The truth is that the Declaration could have very well been their last words.
Right. Yeah.
And that's as real as it gets.
And let's not forget, the Constitution got us into this whole mess. At the time of the Civil War,
by allowing
the Constitution got us into that mess.
Yeah.
So if you're going to reference a document, why do you want to reference the document that created the problem that you're trying to resolve?
That's a good point.
However, I will say, because Lincoln calls it a silver pitcher, it's the preamble of both that there can be agreement upon. If you look at the preamble of the Constitution, it's not getting into the nuts and bolts. It's creating a more perfect union, establishing justice, all sorts of good things like that.
Yeah.
And so even if you get past the preamble of the Declaration, there's some bull in there.
Yeah.
Like the king is inciting rebellions amongst the natives. Like they had no reason to be upset with us in the first place. Right?
The king's doing it. Yeah.
Right. So that's where you get to the nuts and bolts.
Well, rebels aren't always the most rational people, Bob.
Right.
Okay, so now we should do another one someday on the Declaration, but let's get back into this one here because we
are met on a great battlefield of that war. Just a couple things. There's those linking words, but it's a sense of place again. And I wonder, did he point to Culp's Hill? It was this time of year. Most of the leaves are down, and there were not many trees anyway on Cemetery Hill. Did he point to Culp's Hill? Did he point to the Cemetery Gatehouse?
Or
I don't know.
Did he put both arms out because he was surrounded by it?
Right.
Or neither.
Right.
All right.
So there's the theme of place again. We've come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives. Again, note the use of the word here 8 times throughout the speech, okay? And it's an indication of the specialness of the place, and gave their lives as anticipating a later call for our devotion to the cause that they gave their lives for. And I wonder, freshly dug graves, there were marshals there making sure people didn't fall into the graves, right? Yeah. Holes. So did he point to them?
Listen, they still have to be smelling the remnants of that battle too.
Oh, absolutely.
Like that much death, especially in that era, is not leaving the area anytime soon.
Right.
Stinko.
And there's another one of those linking words again, and dedicating again, which is using religious overtones And that word dedicate's going to link a number of sections.
Yeah. Colby, go to my screen so people can see what Bob's talking about. Yeah, sorry. Computador.
Okay, so we're met on a great battlefield that war. We come to dedicate a portion of that field, which refers to the battlefield of earlier too.
So that sentence there, he's just acknowledging why they're all there. I like, though, that he says it is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this, because this idea of these cemeteries is kind of new in our history.
Oh, it absolutely is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's saying, like, the reason we're here is fitting and proper that we do this. This new thing that we're doing is very fitting and very proper.
I wonder, I doubt it, but is the word fitting there? Was that prompted by by Alexander Stevens asking for a few fitting words?
Maybe.
I doubt it, but
probably not. All right, but in a larger sense, we can. All right, now this one we talked about on the phone, and I want to go around the room on this one here. All right, Colby, Eric, we're going to start with you guys in the back. Read this sentence. Put the emphasis where you believe it belongs.
All right. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, and we cannot hallow this ground.
All right, good. Now, Eric, you do it.
But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground.
All right, now, Bob, you and I agree with Sam Waterston.
We cannot dedicate.
Right.
We cannot consecrate. We cannot hallow this ground because of what follows.
The brave men living and dead who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. That's, in other words, what they did is so momentous, so huge, we have nothing on them. There's nothing we can do. Mm-hmm. They are above us. They're so high, high above me. That's what he's saying.
Right. And notice the duality of living and the dead. And again, that theme of life and death of a nation now. Mm-hmm. To add or detract, that duality anticipates a contrast of words and actions that we'll see in the next section.
I was going to say, and as if the humility that he is trying to express isn't enough in that sentence, the next sentence he says, the world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here.
Right.
So if you didn't get it the first time, you better have gotten it that second time.
We and they, living and dead.
I have something I think would be important to shed light on a little bit of his thought in that too, because I think it moves beyond humility. I think that one of the things that I saw in my time overseas that most impressed me, because there is really no glory in war, right? War it's chaotic, it's scary, it's death. I mean, there's no glitz and glamour. There's no music. You know, it's
no. You didn't have an orchestra behind you.
It's pretty
you were,
terrible, right? It's pretty terrible. And the thing that always impressed me is I would see we had a 17-year-old kid in my unit, dude. I mean, so I saw young kids, 17, 18 years old, that were just in high school, maybe 6 months before this. They're fighting in the most dangerous place in the world. And they're getting into a fight every day. And they're getting into fights with big groups of Taliban. And it was always amazing to me that even though they knew there's a good chance I'm going to go out today and die or be mangled and spend the rest of my life crippled. I mean, we had double digits quadriplegics. I mean, lost all 4 limbs. And they would go out, and not only would they go out, they'd go out and face it with a smile and telling jokes. Yeah. And to truly understand the sacrifice that guys in a battle like Gettysburg are making, there's a video I saw of an older gentleman, a World War II veteran, talking about he saw one of his high school friends, a guy that grew up down the street from him on Guadalcanal. And the guy telling the story was a Navy corpsman, worked at the hospital on Guadalcanal. And this is a few weeks before, I want to say it's a few weeks before the Battle of Okinawa. And he sees his friend. And he asks his friend, hey, can I get you anything? You know? And he said, well, we haven't had a blanket. We haven't slept with a blanket in the last year. I would really like to have a blanket to go to sleep with at night. He said, I'll get you one. I'll see you at the movie. They would do a movie screening every night on the island. That was their entertainment. He said, I'll bring it to you. I'll see you at the movie screening. So he does. He shows up at the end of the movie. He gives his buddy this blanket, and he says his buddy that he just gave the blanket to says, well, we're shipping out tomorrow, so I won't see you anymore. And the Navy corpsman looks at him and says, well, listen, when we get back home, why don't we meet up at the soda fountain and we'll get a Coke and we'll talk about, good times. And he looks at his friend and he says, I'm not going to make it home. And he says, well, don't say that. And he said, no, listen, I'm not going to make it home. And sure enough, he goes and fights in Okinawa and is killed. But the fact that he knew that was going to happen, and he still goes.
Yeah.
That's what Lincoln is, I believe, saying, that the sacrifice is so far beyond what happens in the moment. Those guys, most of these guys know what they're getting into before this battle starts.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's his words are amazing.
They are amazing.
And the actions of you, Colby, and that 17-year-old and others were also amazing.
Yeah.
Lincoln, there, if you talk about the physical context, there was a group of wounded from the Battle of Gettysburg to his front right in the front of the speaker's platform. Mm-hmm. I wonder, did he point twice, once to them and once to the graves, the living and the dead? Note the double point. Little note, nor long remember, to make it twice that the words are not important. Note the duality and contrast of little note, long remember, and then, but it can never forget, like what Cody was just talking about. And 2 times here, he uses the word here in this sentence, 2 times. You know what Lincoln did right after the speech? He went to those wounded veterans first, and he said to them, your presence here today speaks with more volume than all the words that were said here today.
Yeah.
And Everett said over 13,000.
Yeah.
And the prayer was longer than Lincoln's speech. And a poem.
People love talking. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here, have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
Notice a triad there. Like a preacher at the end of a sermon, or a football coach trying to get the team to get out there and kick ass at halftime, right? There's a triad, and it gets more intense. He's honoring the dead, and he's asking us, the living, to emulate their devotion. There's a contrast between the living's, quote, increased devotion to the dead's last full measure of devotion. I mean, they did it, so why can't we go out there and play harder or whatever it is? It gets more intense. It goes from, in the second part you read, that we highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. Did he point to the graves again? That this nation, and remember the theme of national birth, death, and rebirth, under God, again, very religious framing. And what did Abraham Lincoln do on July 1st, 2nd, 3rd of 1863? He writes he was on his knees. Yeah. A man who has no formal membership in any church was on his knees asking God for intervention. And he adds these words later, not on the first copy.
I think shall have a new birth of freedom is also very telling, like being born again, you know?
Absolutely. Again, religious theme. And notice this new birth of freedom is not a separate result from government of, by, and for the people. I used to think of it in terms of, there's two good things coming out of it. There will be a new birth of freedom, the end of slavery, and the government of, by, and for the people survives. These depend on each other. You cannot have slavery and democracy. Reference the House Divided speech.
Right.
Slavery is a cancer that will be the death of the nation. The survival of democracy depends on being built on the cornerstone of the Declaration of Independence, which professed that all men are created equal and you need the consent of the governed. And slavery is the opposite of consent.
Yes.
Right?
I think before when I said we agree with Sam Waterston, I think it was actually this part where he emphasizes people each time.
Yeah.
I don't remember if he emphasizes we. We cannot dedicate. We cannot cause. I think that's actually when Patrick Gorman read it for me. I think that's what he did. But you don't hear that. Usually when people recite it, they go, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth. But the whole point of this speech is about this new birth of freedom. It's about people. So the emphasis I'm imagining that Lincoln would have had is on the word people, of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth.
Yep. Me too.
Yeah.
Matthew, we've gotten through half of my plan.
Yes.
Okay.
It was a big plan.
So, yeah, right.
I think you brought your whole semester with you.
Well, it was nice teaching at the college level last year because you can do this, get more in detail. But we haven't talked about the impact of the speech, but I'd like to invite your listeners to listen back to, I don't know the date, maybe you can put it in some show notes or something, when we had Jared Pietman.
Yeah, that was 2 years ago, I think. We were in the old shed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you had the
Jared Pietman, Doug Dowds.
Doug Dowds, my Marine Corps buddy.
Yep, and we had
Fran.
Bob was there, and Fran was there. Fran Fiat.
Well, I was just a fly on the wall.
Right, you were just in there.
I didn't speak up very much.
Well,
I wanted to.
Go into the books here real quick here, folks, and then these are the books that Bob recommends here. Jared Pietman, there he is.
Jared Pietman's book.
Yeah, The Long Shadow of Lincoln's Arm.
Lincoln's Gettysburg Address.
Sorry,
yeah,
I wasn't.
And in there, he talks about what I have prepared to do. And if you want me to come back some other time,
we could do
that.
Okay, next year, for the anniversary.
But impact, and even some things that most of I got from Pietman. But Alan Gelzo, locals would know Alan Gelzo. This book is Our Ancient Faith.
Lincoln,
I read
Democracy, and the American Experiment.
I read this spring. It's bigger than just the Gettysburg Address, but it's a very good read.
All right.
As is John Meacham, And There Was Light. These are two books I've read within
Abraham Lincoln and the American Struggle. All right.
Yeah. Kind of democracy and the relevancy. Drew Gilpin Faust from Harvard wrote This Republic of Suffering, a pretty quick read and a pretty interesting read.
And there was a documentary called Death in the Civil War on PBS, based on this book, which is very good, very depressing, but very well done.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this was something new, death on this scale. And it's the first time in history that the American federal government is going to take responsibility for the bodies of those who here gave their lives that nation might live.
Which is so crazy because really in world history before that, it's like you died and they just kind of left you there, right?
Right.
Well, it was up to the locals to clean it up.
Up to the locals, yeah.
Right. Or the battles were down south. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, all over the world.
All over the world. Right.
Yeah. The Gettysburg Gospel. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is, I'm sure most people are familiar with the War Boritz, the Gettysburg Gospel. Also a great read. And, this is one that I found not exactly scintillating, but helpful, just reading with Lincoln that I referred to before. The author, Robert Bray. I think it was 2010 this came out, Reading with Lincoln.
Bob, thank you very much. The amount of work you did on this is, I'm sorry we didn't have more time to do this because it's really well done and very interesting. I love this speech, and it's every time I parse it with somebody, I get a different feel for it. You know, it's really amazing.
Yeah,
it's an amazing.
I've loved hearing the comments of Eric and Colby. And
thank you guys for that. Thank you, Cindy, for coming in, and all you guys. Thanks for this was supposed to be live, ladies and gentlemen, but I guess my computer needs an update and it wouldn't go live. So we recorded it, and now I'm gonna pop it up on YouTube so that people can watch it in time for the anniversary tomorrow. And that's about it. So thank you very much, Bobby, Cindy, Colby, Eric. And thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Leave in the comments, let us know what your thoughts on the Gettysburg Address are. And if there's one word that comes to mind when you think of it, I'd like to know what that is. So that's it for now, everybody. Thank you very much. Have a good one. Talk to you later.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, guys.